Coming up on today's Locked On Bucks, we go through quite a bit of news that has come our way in the last couple of days. Some around Giannis, some around a coaching name that we previously referenced, and we share our thoughts on the first few episodes of Clipped, our chance to see Doc Rivers on the silver screen. We get into it after this on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined by Camille Davis, and we thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen every day. Free and available wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on YouTube as well. It is all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Camille, I said it was basically a house cleaning episode that we have here. Is a couple of pieces of news we'll get into. We are now a day away from the NBA Finals beginning, which I'm sure Bucks fans are probably rooting hard for one team, even though it would mean bringing a championship to a former coach that was not highly viewed his time in Milwaukee. And an interesting TV series, which we'll get to in our final segment. But we start with that first piece of news, and that came the other day, learning through various reports. It has since been confirmed. Jim Owczarski and Eric Nehm both confirming Giannis will play for the Greek national team coming up here in the Olympic qualifying trials, and hopefully the Olympics. They're in the group from hell in terms of getting out of there. But look, we'll get into all the rest of the discourse that has surrounded this. But when you saw that report, your first reaction was what?
He must be feeling better. Was my very first reaction of, okay, this sounds like it's good news for the CAF in itself, since we haven't seen him play since, ironically enough, it was against the Boston Celtics, the team we're going to see kick off the NBA Finals tomorrow. But that was my first thought. Well, like, okay, the CAF must be feeling good. And then my second thought was, the discourse around this is going to be interesting, because it always is when it comes to Giannis and playing internationally with Greece. There's always a very loud subset of Bucks fans who just want to wrap up that man and bubble wrap and say, like, you do not do anything that's going to be really strenuous on your body this summer until you can suit up for the Milwaukee Bucks. And I definitely get having that interest in your favorite team, but understanding Giannis and the person that he is, like, playing for Greece means something for that man. It means a lot to him. So, like, of course, if he wants to do it, the Bucks aren't going to say no. And the point I always make is, like, in the offseason, guys are going to be playing basketball anyways. Like, in this situation, he's going to be playing a high level of competition, getting in shape, have coaches around him. So, like, it should be good for him. But first and foremost, my thought, again, was just, I'm glad that he's feeling better enough to be back out here on the court. And I miss watching him play, so I'm kind of excited.
Yeah, they're going to open up against Canada. And as we mentioned, they're in an absolutely loaded group in Group A. So it's going to be tough for them to qualify for the Olympics. But I think a lot goes into this. You know, number one, we know how important family is to Giannis. And as we've seen in the past, he gets a chance to play with his brother Thanasis on this team. Now, not the case this summer with Thanasis rupturing his Achilles, but Kostas is also on the Greek national team, and we saw Giannis just with Kostas and Thanasis there, as well as they won the EuroLeague championship. Yep. So it's another opportunity for Giannis to get to play with at least one of his brothers. You mentioned representing his country, and as anybody that is, which I would assume is every single Bucks fan that has followed Giannis's story and his path, how important the country of Greece is to him. And look, we kind of tiptoed around the discourse, as there's been, I don't think a lot, but there's been some backlash of why is he playing for the Olympics? He just missed 2 straight postseasons, or the better part of 2 postseasons. And I think we've seen for the last 3 years, this team needs to be healthy, so rather than him playing, blah, blah, blah. Anytime you start your point with, I understand whatever this is, but I'm just going to stop you there. I don't think you fully understand that. If he wants to play, he gets to play. I mean, I think at this point, whatever Giannis wants to do, He already brought the team a championship. I understand the importance of having him healthy. And I think the interesting juxtaposition is that, he himself acknowledged that this offseason, he's probably going to have to assess doing some things differently. I take that more, not so much as off-season work and preparation, but just how many minutes I play and how many games I play. I would assume, I think you and I talked about this even before this news came out. I was leaning towards, I think he'll probably play fewer games next season. I think he'll probably play less minutes next season. To me, this basically cements that is going to be the case.
Interesting. So I'm gonna come back to you saying that cements the case for you, but what's interesting about this too is like the what's at stake. Of course, it's the Olympics and you want to get there, but Greece hasn't even earned their spot to
Yeah.
get to the Olympics yet. So what we're even talking about him playing is that he's just trying to play in this tournament so that Greece can try to qualify for the Olympics. So like we don't even know if he's going to make it, because in that tournament that they're playing in, they're also playing against Croatia and New Zealand and Egypt and Slovenia. And even though Luka is about to be in the NBA finals, like it's still expected that he is going to play for his home country, Slovenia, which is going to only be a couple of weeks after the finals close. So again, it goes to show how important international play is to star players, for the fact that Luka's going to be finishing up a finals run. And teams are like, we still expect him to come out here and play. And for Giannis, again, it's an important moment for him, like you mentioned, playing with his brothers. But I'm really curious about what aspect of that, in your opinion, made you be like, this is for sure going to happen. Like, this cements it for me.
Playing fewer games. I think just the fact that you're taking on, and even if, as you mentioned, I mean, we may not even get there. It could be what, a game, basically, 2 games that it could be, and it's it. But I think just kind of taking on some more and acknowledging too, I think the fact that Giannis was as open as he was with, I don't remember what the exact line was, but when he was talking with Jim Ozarski and Eric as well at the essentially your end of season pressers, and that, I have to examine how I prepare my body in the off season and everything. Maybe I follow a different pattern here. Maybe we try things differently. I think he said he doesn't like that word rest. If he can play, he's going to play, but if he can't play, he's not going to play. But even kind of walking up to that line of, all right, maybe if I can play, I definitely could, but maybe it's one of those games that I just start to rest. So I think it's just a matter of checkpoints and taking on more work throughout the offseason. Look, as we've seen the importance of this team being healthy, for the longest time, we talked about it earlier this season too, of the importance of, hey, just avoid the 4 seeds. So you don't get the Boston Celtics in the second round, and you can put off that matchup as long as possible. I've even kind of changed my view on that too, as we've seen now 3 straight off seasons, or 3 straight playoffs, I should say, the other end of it, where you don't have guys healthy. That to me, hey, even if it's certainly suboptimal, but even if it means you're a 6 seed, but you can tell me all 3 of these guys and potentially more are going to be fully healthy for the playoffs, fine. I'll take that, because we've seen the opposite and just how difficult it is to advance out of the first round, no less, if you don't have all of those guys.
Yeah. Injuries are random. Like all of this that we're talking about, maybe it's less minutes, maybe it's less games, so on and so forth. These are all just measures you try to put in place to try and be as healthy as you possibly can. But there's no guarantee that that's going to work. And that's what Giannis was mentioning. Like, I might rest in March, but that's no guarantee that I'll be ready to go late April and May. Like, who knows what happens in between that time? It just takes one moment and one game to change everything. So with that, like, I am definitely here for trying to put measures in place to try to avoid or lessen the chance of anything happening. That makes sense. That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to put everything in place as you can to have the best shot at health, the best shot at a title, so on and so forth. And again, it goes back to what I said earlier, like, basketball players are going to play basketball. Like, from what I understand, from what I heard, some of these private runs that these players have in the off season, they go really hard in some of these in some of these games. So, like, yes, Olympic competition is a different level to that for sure, but we get to watch it. And we haven't been able to watch Giannis play basketball since April 9th. Was that Celtics game? Like, it's been 2 months. And by the time that, these games happen in July, it'll be almost 3 months since we last saw Giannis play basketball. And honestly, at that point, I'm just going to be happy to see him back on the court.
Yeah, and to that point, as we mentioned, the finals start tomorrow. It's going to be interesting to see Kristaps Porzingis. No injuries, as you mentioned, are random. No injuries exactly the same, especially with different players' bodies. But it's going to be very interesting to see how Kristaps Porzingis looks, as that's what close to a month later than Giannis suffered the injury, a couple of weeks later. And as you mentioned as well, Giannis is going to be returning to the floor about a month after Kristaps Porzingis. So that's going to be something to monitor. That quote, too, as we wrap up this discussion, maybe I do follow a different pattern and maybe try different things. I don't like the word rest. If I can play, I will play. If I cannot play, I can't play. So this is what I always believe. If I can move and I'm available, I'm going to be available. I don't like when you miss a game in November so you can be available in April because you still don't know you're going to be available in April. Then you go out and you get to April and you're not available and you're like, why did I miss all those games? So I'm going to for sure sit down and think about it, of how my summer is going to look like and how next year is going to look. And I'm thinking with my physio and the staff, I'm going to try and make the best decision possible for me to be available. It's something you cannot control. And I think the last part is, what you mentioned. It's random. And you think about the way he suffered these injuries. It's what we've talked about in the past with Chris Middleton. Is he injury prone? It's going to be hard to shake that label, but these were freak injuries. When you think about slipping on a wet spot, coming down on Kevin Durant's ankle, that's really the thing you can't plan for. And it's a larger discussion that I'm sure we'll have as we start to approach international play here of the injuries and rest and everything else. It's no different than what you hear a lot in baseball of, is it, are we putting undue stress and basically putting miles on the guys by even so much as having them get up to warm up in the bullpen? And is that the same conversation of if Giannis plays X amount of games, but this game he plays 20 minutes? Well, why not just play him the whole game and give him off the next game if that's the case? Yeah. So that's a much, much larger discussion that we will get into as we continue to get through the offseason here. And who knows, depending on what Greece does, if they can advance, qualify for the Olympics, and if that extends the summer for Giannis, that'll be a very interesting part of the conversation. So we'll get into that in the coming episodes here. But coming up in the next segment, as I mentioned, more reports about a former Bucks player, current coach. We already had one report linking him to the Bucks, and now there is another one indicating a very strong desire to bring him to Milwaukee. So we'll get to that conversation coming up after this on Locked On Bucks. And this next segment of Locked On Bucks is brought to you by BetterHelp, as sometimes we all need to get some things and some stressors off our chest. Maybe it's what we just discussed. Maybe you're one of those that we said, look, if Giannis wants to play, Giannis gets to play. Maybe you're fretting over, I don't want to see Giannis putting extra wear and tear on the body in the offseason. God forbid something else happens there. That may be what you're stressing over, or it may be something very, very larger. No matter what it is, stressors can get to all of us, big or small. When we keep them bottled up, it can start to affect all of us negatively. Therapy is a safe space. It's not anything negative to be considered. It's where you can get things off your chest and where you can figure out how to work through whatever it is that is weighing you down. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. They are entirely online, designed to be convenient. They're flexible, and most importantly, suited entirely to your schedule. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire, and from there, you will get matched with a licensed therapist. You can even switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Truly built around your schedule. Get it off your chest with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today and get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. All right, Camille, there is another name, or another report, I should say, out there for a name that we discussed previously, and that is Sam Cassell. I hesitate to even bring up the name of who had the report, since he is very polarizing among Bucks fans, but
Might be an
Gary
understatement.
Woolful with the reports that item that rumors persist. The Bucks want to hire Celtics assistant coach Sam Cassell. According to him, the Bucks are willing to make him the highest paid assistant coach in the NBA in order to get him to join the Bucks staff. So a couple of things, and I'm curious if you take anything from this. I mean, we talked about this at the time of the initial report. I think we both said the way that everything was worded from Mark Stein, I believe, had the initial report that, boy, it certainly sounds like if he does not get the head coaching job of the Lakers, I would lean towards Sam Cassell is going to join the staff of the Bucks. We already saw a couple of changes made to the Bucks coaching staff, but it certainly seems like JJ Redick is about to be named the head coach of the Los Angeles Lakers. What that means for Sam Cassell, we've seen other teams linked in terms of interest, but that was at the assistant level. The Lakers were the only team that was interested in bringing him on as a head coach. And I don't know, I guess we'll start here. Do you think, assuming that JJ Redick goes to the Lakers, do you think Sam Cassell's next job depends on what happens in the NBA Finals?
It's a good question, because theoretically, if they win, he might be like, "Hey, I want to
I've done
continue
all I
to do
can."
it.
Yeah.
Like let's run this back. Let's try to defend this." The other half of that could be like, I'm most comfortable with Doc Rivers. Like, I understand, like, since I've been a coach, I spent most of my time with Doc Rivers. They had the stops in Philly most recently. So, like, there's just a lot of years that they've had together coaching. And on top of that, he also has some Milwaukee connections with his time here as a player with that 0-1 team, as we talk about a lot. I got to say, I definitely hope it happens. From everything I've been hearing about the type of a coach Sam Cassell is and how he pushes his players and just what he brings to a team, I absolutely am here for that. And then the sweetener of that is that that's also a brain drain from a rival in the conference, taking away talent from the Boston Celtics. And anytime you can do that as well, you can get better and hurt a rival. That's normally beneficial, because the Celtics are also going to be losing Charles Lee this offseason, since he's going to become the head coach of the Hornets. Another Milwaukee Buck connection there, with Charles Lee also being a former assistant coach for the Bucks at a time and point. But if you can have Charles Lee leave, if you can have Sam Cassell leave and he comes to Milwaukee, like, here for it, for both of those reasons, for what he has done from what we've heard as a coach, as well as taking some talent away from that Boston Celtics team.
That's a big piece of it is, you mentioned the biggest part in that Charles Lee, we already know is leaving, and potentially Sam Cassell as well. I mean, those were basically Joe Mazzulla's two lieutenants on the team. Sam Cassell, I believe 10 years that he had coached with Doc Rivers. He was there through the entire duration with the Los Angeles Clippers, or maybe all but 1 year. He was there for most of the time with the Clippers. And then, as you referenced, those years with the 76ers. So he's very comfortable with him. And, if you can get Sam Cassell, you mentioned how he's viewed as a coach in his style. It's no different from Sam Cassell's style and personality as a player.
Thanks.
But, the big thing is, let's say this happens. And I still kind of lean towards, I think it's going to happen. I think, for how many reports are out there, and just the connection that he clearly has with Doc Rivers, I think where there's smoke, there's fire. And the interesting part of that is it's the exact opposite conversation we had last year, basically for the duration of the year, especially early in that season when we thought, okay, inexperienced head coach, what is the staff going to look like? And we saw Joe Prunty, we saw Terry Stotts, short-lived, but that was about it. I mean, you had guys that had some experience as assistant coaches. If this happens, you not only have a very highly experienced head coach, you have highly experienced assistant coaches as well. Obviously, Rex Kalamian that we saw last year, and Dave Yeager and Sam Cassell, you would add to that. Pete Fernandez as well, that Doc Rivers brought on board midway through his stay in Milwaukee. So you would go from one extreme to the next. And I'm not sure that that means, hey, you're poised to win a championship, but I would much rather have that when I look on the sidelines than I would guys that are just kind of figuring it out or in their first or second stop out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's important with the veteran team, as we always talk about the level of urgency for the Milwaukee Bucks, what they're after, what they're chasing. But the flip side to that is also just the fact that if looking at the Bucks roster today, and we talk about the young Bucks a lot and how there are 4 guys on that roster right now who are young players, that development aspect as well, having experienced head coach or experienced assistant coaches as well to continue to work with you and try to develop your game is also going to be very important. But another aspect of it that we've talked about is just managing personalities and being able to have real conversations is what you need. You say it often, the Bucks are a super team. Like, we don't think about it that way a lot of the times because it's our Milwaukee Bucks. We've seen Giannis here forever. We've had Chris for so long, but Damian Lillard coming changes the equation. So being able to have as many voices as you can with the experience to help not only manage what you see on the court with the X's and O's, but also in the locker room. And that's not me saying like Dame and Giannis are like going at each other or that they have type of personalities that are going to be disruptive to a locker room. But you do have alphas in that locker room, and you're going to have to make sure that roles are clear and that communication is really, really good so everybody understands what's expected of them. And then also having that accountability so that you are doing what you're supposed to be doing. And if you're not doing it, being corrected by voices that you can trust because they've been around so long, they've seen so many different things, and you respect those voices as well. So Sam Cassell coming to the Bucks would be a positive for sure.
And I think I said Pete Fernandez, Pete Dominguez, that came on board, I think 2-3 weeks after Doc Rivers, just after the All-Star break, that he joined the staff, and he had experience with Doc in Los Angeles as well. One last thing, it doesn't necessarily pertain to the Bucks. Maybe it's something to monitor, but it's certainly Bucks fans are interested in it, and that is on the assistant coaching front. We wondered if this would be the case, and Darvin Ham was offered an assistant job on Mike Budenholzer's staff. And as you and I both speculated, turned it down. I would assume no reason was given, but I would assume it's, hey, I'm not going from head coach to assistant coach immediately. So that's interesting, and that will no less do nothing to quiet down any day. Hey, can you add Darvin Ham back to the staff?
Yeah.
Well, what were you going to say?
I was just say, yeah, that's something that's always just going to happen because of the fans' affinity for Darvin Ham. Like that's just going to be.
Well, speaking of coaches and speaking of Doc Rivers, coming up in the next segment here, we both watched the first 2 episodes of Clipped, and we have some thoughts. We will get to that on the final segment here as, man, what an experience that was. But we'll discuss coming up after this on Locked On Bucks. It is winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. You're watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day and constantly find yourself turning down the volume because of all the shouting. That means it's time to make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel that is programmed for you every single day, bringing you the biggest stories without all of the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, news, and it streams 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, Camille, we both checked out the first 2 episodes of Clipped, and I was very anxious to see what this was going to look like. Obviously, we are all familiar with the story, not that far removed from it. Hard to believe 10 years ago that this already happened, but of course, chronicling, it's really not the story, at least from what I can gather, 2 episodes in. This is basically looking at maybe 3 weeks that we're looking at in the timeline of basically Doc Rivers being hired as the head coach of the Clippers, speeds up to the playoffs, and then everything after that occurred. So look, we can get into more conversations around the show, as maybe it's something we'll cover weekly, as I think it's only 6 episodes or so. But as we were talking before we started recording here, I think when we saw the reports of Laurence Fishburne playing Doc Rivers, you thought, okay, that's a choice. And then you saw the images and thought, all right, I can kind of see parts of it. I'm not quite sure, but I'll go with it. Doc Rivers even joked about it when he was asked earlier in the season and said, I don't think Larry's going to try to do the voice, but I've seen some other images. It was the rest of the casting to me that was certainly a choice.
Absolutely. When I saw Lil Murda from P Valley playing Chris Paul, I said, "Oh my goodness, this is going to be difficult for me to not see Lil Murda for a second." But no, when the show opens up and you see Laurence Fishburne as Doc Rivers, like I initially laughed because I can't believe Laurence Fishburne is playing Doc Rivers in a TV show, and then you see Ed O'Neill, and it's like this is Al Bundy playing downstairs. Like this is crazy to me, just seeing some of these characters in this spot. But then as you're watching it, you just kind of like, okay, I'm accepting this for what it is. But the basketball scenes, that's difficult. Before we got on live, I was like, I think basketball is one of the hardest sports like to act like you're good at if you're not good at it. And the fact that like Blake Griffin is the same height as JJ Redick, like you can't help that. Like actors are only so
that
tall.
Blake Griffin has no definition and
No.
no musculature at all. That's
No,
the
he kind of
casting.
looks like Trevor from Fresh Prince a little bit, like just kind of just here. But no, I found it interesting. Like one, the fact that Donald Sterling was so cheap with the Clippers, like Doc Rivers had to take a lift, it seemed like, to facilities. He got a deli platter for his welcome. It's like, man, he was so cheap with that franchise, but apparently he was cashing out on Miss B. So we know where his priorities laid, and it was not necessarily with the Clippers being like a world-class organization.
The Chris Paul casting was a bit rough, especially the one random scene where he has the mustache, and then it's
like
gone through the rest of the next 2 episodes. The Blake, as we touched on, very tough casting there. DeAndre Jordan, I mean, sure, in terms of the face, you pulled it off. Everything else, he was about 6'5" at most. The JJ Redick one is a very tough cast, but maybe the most egregious of all of them is in episode 2 when you get to the playoff games in the series with the Warriors. I don't know what we were going for with that Steph Curry. Did you see the why does the name escape me now? The Von Erich family biopic.
I did.
So the casting for Ric Flair in that was very reminiscent of a lot of the casting choices for this series.
That is a nice way to say, like, you're not effing with any of this. You just like, this is not believable. I'm not here for it. You don't have the charisma, or what they say now, the riz. I'm not feeling it. But no, I mean, yeah, the Warriors portrayals were bad. Steph Curry in particular, that was like, this man is like Steph Curry and a half. Like, it just didn't look believable. I wouldn't even believe he can play basketball. So on and so forth.
He had the goatee too, where it's like, I don't remember Steph with that pronounced facial hair.
No, not at that point, at the very least. Like when he got older, we got some more facial hair, but no, not in 2014. But yeah, the second episode was a little lighter on the basketball aspect of it. The first episode was, of course, introducing the Clippers and everything that goes in with that. But second episode was a lot more of the love triangle with Donald Sterling and V and his wife, which is a wild sentence to say. But one of the Doc River things that stood out to me was just how he was talking to Chris Paul and Blake Griffin, trying to get a beat on the team and understand where everybody was. And it just made me laugh, where he's just kind of figuring out like, oh, these two guys hate each other. Okay, let me try and figure this out.
That was, I think the Doc Rivers character is believable in being around him for half of a season and everything that we've known from Doc, the personality. Like, yeah, I believe most, if not all of this is legitimate. That portion that you touched on kind of reminded you too of hearing from multiple players that Doc kind of came to us individually and gave us our expectations and asked how things work around here and everything else. And I think Laurence Fishburne got down a lot of the mannerisms of Doc Rivers as well. You're never going to pull off the voice. I don't remember, look, no offense to Laurence Fishburne. I don't know if Doc Rivers was ever the size of Laurence Fishburne, but I think he pulled off the mannerisms and everything else. So I am going to be curious, maybe if for no other reason than it's bad, but you can't stop watching it. We're going to see it through to the end. So I'm curious to see how this picks up. But the other interesting part, I'll leave you with that, is I thought it was interesting that, they cast the actual reporters that you could see early in episode 1, I think it was, the actual reporters portraying themselves in this.
Yeah. Some realism there. You had to kind of blend it all together and try to make it look as real as possible. Like, that was actually going to be my question to you, which you kind of answered. But if we didn't have the idea to even talk about this a little bit on the podcast because of the Doc Rivers connection and it's the off season, so on and so forth, would you be watching this show just like, so me too, because I kind of like a little trashy TV every so often. So you can mix in some trashy TV with historical facts with the NBA. Like, I'm going to definitely tune into that.
Yeah, we are definitely going to continue to tune in, and I suppose we'll share our weekly thoughts on it as well. I think it's Mondays that it's going to be on every single Monday. So we'll keep you updated on that. As you listen to this, you still have a little bit of time left to cast your vote for what we're going to cover on Friday's episode. The last I checked, it is evened out a little bit, but the 2000-2001 Bucks are the leaders. So just a little bit of time left to cast your vote on that. We will be back once again tomorrow and continue to take a look ahead to the NBA Finals. Also start to take a look ahead to the rest of the offseason. We went through the cap and players and everything else with Frank earlier in the week, but we're getting close to the NBA draft. So we'll start to take a look at that stuff as well. For Camille, I'm Justin. We'll talk to you once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.